All right, eager students, it's time to learn how a cell can get materials into and out of itself. In other words, how cells maintain homeostasis. All right, so here we have a basic diagram of a cell. Now, this cell, in order to live, is going to need some materials. For example, it's going to need some oxygen, it's going to need some water, and it's going to need some glucose for energy. Now the question is, how is it going to do that, right? Because in addition to that, it's also going to need to get rid of carbon dioxide from cellular respiration. It's going to need to get rid of any excess water, and it's also going to need to get rid of any waste products as well. One way it can do this without having a mouth per se is by taking advantage of nature's natural tendency to go from an area of high energy and cruise down to an area of low energy without using any input of energy. In other words, with this bike right here on the edge of the hill here, that biker can coast down the hill without pedaling at all and eventually reach an area of lower energy. Now, if that bike wants to go back up, it's going to have to put energy into it and pedal hard back up to the top. So let's see how a cell takes advantage of this to get materials in and out of it. So what a cell's going to do is use a process called diffusion to get these materials in and out of its body. Now, diffusion is the movement of materials from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. So we see it again. Nature's tendency is to move things from an area of high energy to an area of low energy. Now, in a cell using materials, what we're really looking at are particles. That is, molecules of molecules of glucose or oxygen or water. Okay, so look at this container I've got right here. This container has a whole bunch of particles on one side of the container, and then it's separated by this little barrier here, and there's no particles over here. So we would say this area right up here has a high concentration of particles, and this area right down here has a low concentration of particles. So in this case, I've got it arranged up and down, but this could go any direction because in this case, particles are going to be traveling down what's called a concentration gradient. All right, so a concentration gradient is kind of like our natural hill here, only the hill is from an area of high concentration cruising down to an area of low concentration. So these particles up here will actually pass through this little barrier and start populating this other part of the container right here. Now the question is, why are the particles then not diffusing or moving out of the container? Because there's a low concentration outside of the container as well. Well, the reason for that is this little barrier around the container is what we would call as impermeable. That is, things can't move through it. It's like a wall. But this barrier right here, that's a selectively permeable membrane or a selectively permeable barrier. What that means is it's just big enough, it's just got big enough holes in it that some things can pass through but not everything else. The analogy I like to use is the door on a house. A door on a house is designed for a regular sized human to fit through, but there's no way a larger elephant would be able to squeeze through that door without busting it down. All right, now eventually these particles, as they move down, they're going to kind of equalize. That is, we're going to see the same kind of concentration of particles on one side as the other. At this point, we've reached what is called equilibrium, and we pretty much have no energy at this point. That is, we don't have a concentration gradient. We're sitting on flat ground. So any particle that travels from one side of the container to the other will have another particle travel from that side of the container back again. So we're just going to have kind of this natural little cycling here, but it's not going to have a ton of energy in it and not enough to do anything. So that's how our cell gets materials in. If there's a low concentration in the cell, that is, the cell needs something, materials will diffuse in. If there's a high concentration inside, like of waste products, it's going to naturally diffuse out from an area of high, cruising down the concentration gradient to an area of low.